We're here to inspire, inform, and connect a community of entrepreneurs. I'm Alex Worley. This is Business Rockstars, and today's rockstar, Chad Newell. He is the co-founder and CEO of Snapwire. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so would you say that you've always been entrepreneurial in spirit?
Yes, definitely, yeah.
At what point did you actually become an entrepreneur?
I think the first moment in time that I became an entrepreneur was when I picked our neighbor's flowers with my brother, and we sold them back to the same neighbor.
I cannot tell you how many entrepreneurs I interview that have a story where like you could see it in their childhood.
Yeah.
So what made you actually want to be an entrepreneur as an adult?
I think my first experience with wanting to be an entrepreneur was realizing in my first job that it was difficult to let go of the passion and the fire inside of me when the company that I was working for was going one direction, and I just knew in my heart that, in fact, that might not be the right choices for the company. Invariably, those choices did, result in the fail of that company. But I think you realize early on, if you're an entrepreneur, that your heart is telling you to go and pursue something that is bigger than what you can come to you organically. So you often have to lead that.
Because when you're working for another company, a lot of times you hit a ceiling, and sometimes people would rather stay there, and that's totally fine for those people. But in this case, you wanted to pursue something bigger without limits.
And that learning process is not just one time and succeed. You have to, learn, do it over and over, repeat, fail. So there were a few ventures in my early days that were comical, but.
So at what point did you know that you were going to quit your 9-to-5, your secure full-time job, to actually pursue your business?
Oftentimes out of negative experiences, positive outcomes come, open windows occur. The company that I was working for ran out of funding, and my wife and I sort of looked at each other and said, hey, I think we could make a run at this on our own. And in 2001, we started my first company that I would call a serious company. That was called Media Bakery. And that's kind of how.
And of course, you have experience in the stock photo industry, right?
Yeah, prior to that, I had worked 9-to-5 for a company called the Image Bank. And in the stock photo business, almost 20 years ago, transparencies were the leading way in which image buyers or art buyers got access to photos. And the Image Bank was subsequently acquired by Getty Images before they actually launched their first website in the late 90s.
So do you think it's necessary for an aspiring entrepreneur to work for another company in the industry they want to be in first?
Entrepreneurs who take the lens of what they want to do. If it's an entrepreneur who wants to build a very big business where they have to raise capital against it, certainly having that Fortune 500 or that traditional business experience shapes acumen. And I think that's a really critical growth component.
What were some of those first steps to starting your own business?
A lot of guts, a lot of fear. You have to overcome your fear. But once you commit to an idea, and I'm sure you've heard other entrepreneurs talk about this, you start sharing that idea with others. And it's almost, it's inside of you so deeply that you might confide in a friend to say you have this idea. And then the more that you practice that, the more the idea shapes, and you hear their feedback, and you ultimately take the plunge and start that business. But one of the earliest tips, I think, that we can share with an audience is that, in fact, you have to share your idea and not covet it.
What is Snapwire's 30-second elevator pitch?
Snapwire is a platform that connects visionary mobile photographers and traditional photographers with businesses and brands who need authentic, quality content, photographs, essentially.
How did you come up with the idea?
We had been in the stock photography space for a number of years and ran a traditional agency called Media Bakery. It has 10 million images under contract from 190 different photo partners like Getty Images, for example. And the one thing that our photo buyers had always been clamoring for is a photo that doesn't look like a stock photo. We all know that story of the brunette, Scandinavian brunette with a headset on appearing in 1,500 different websites as a call center representative. So that is a problem that exists in stock. There's nothing authentic about the existing archives that exist. And we started thinking about the enormous amount of talent sort of flocking to platforms like Instagram, and how they were sort of just maxing out on the number of likes and followers, and not really understanding the commercial value for their beautiful photos. Granted, Instagram has changed over the years quite dramatically, but in the early days, it was saturated with highly talented producers and photographers. So we thought, well, what if we sort of created a hybrid model, essentially, where we actually have a stock photo library, but the way that we build that stock photo library is through assignments, essentially. So as the way it works is that a photo buyer can launch a creative brief on our platform, and that's broadcasted out to 300,000 photographers in 180 countries, and they effectively respond in real time by submitting their best shots.
So you make an order of what you specifically need.
That's right.
Yeah.
But we make it fun too, because not everybody wins the winning photograph.
Right.
And so one of the innovative things that we've come up with that actually serves the buyer is a point and leveling system. So today, anybody in the world can sign up for Snapwire. And it takes a nomination from a photo buyer or a purchase from a photo buyer to actually move up through this quality control membrane that we built in.
So there are incentives.
That's right. There's 5 levels. Everybody can start out as an explorer, but the goal is to get up to a pro. And the more levels that you level up with, and the more points you earn, the more exposure the app gives you, ensuring that you have more and more success through time. So, there are lots of aspiring photographers, and some of them are really good, and some of them are, talented people that, but beauty is always going to be in the eye of the beholder, and in our platform, that determines success.
You are a good example of how if you know that industry, if you worked in that industry, you can find the holes.
That's right.
And still create more opportunity and make a name for yourself.
That's right. And authenticity is a buzzword that's overly used in our industry, but it
Yeah.
certainly applies to commercial trends that are sort of evolving today. The days of the sort of staged stock photo are long gone, and everybody needs authentic photos to tell their brand story, and that's kind of what Snapwire solves the problem for.
Yeah.
But it's also worth mentioning that if you're a user on the platform and your photos aren't necessarily purchased by a brand or a business on a particular brief, there's a secondary reward system in place where our system will look at the quality of the content using image recognition software and automatically identify it and move it over to our growing library. So I think today we have about 3 million images in our stock photo library. So buyers can choose to go either left or right, the traditional way, which is they find a search box and put in a keyword to find a photo, or launch a creative brief and have our photographers respond in real time.
So did you come up with a formal business plan right away, or did you kind of just plan as you went?
I think every entrepreneur has to come up with a plan in some way and document it so that that vision can be shared. But I did not come up with a traditional business plan per se to start this. In fact, we wanted to launch this as a service inside of our first business called Media Bakery. But it became quickly obvious that this kind of a business needed a unique platform that was going to take significant resources to build. And so that set us on a journey to raise capital. And so I went ahead and created a pitch deck effectively with my co-founder, and that is the mechanism in which we raised our initial capital to start Snapwire.
And speaking of raising capital, you're going about a really unique way of raising money. Tell me about that.
I think the best way to describe it is to tell a little bit more about our funding history. In those early days when we decided to raise capital, we raised it from angel investors. These are usually accredited investors with high net worths that are used to investing in startups in Silicon Valley, in New York and Los Angeles. And so we raised, $2 million historically on convertible notes, essentially. When our company was ready for its first price round, or sort of the bigger check to kind of grow the business, we had to be measured by our marketplace metrics or our unit economics. And while we had great growth on our photographer supply side, we were still brand new. We had just finished building the $2 million tool, but it was now time to scale. And so we struggled to raise our first price round. And actually, a lot of companies do this. But in 2012, the Jobs Act had released 2 innovative ways to fundraise, and that is through crowdfunding. Something called Title III and Title IV of the Jobs Act afford private companies to raise money from non-accredited investors. So now everybody in the world who wants to invest in an early stage company, like Snapwire or another company, can do so without having to be an accredited investor before they effectively go public. And if you can imagine, the opportunity to invest into early days of Facebook, how that would have turned out for you.
Yeah.
So, not to say that we're going to be that successful as an outcome for our company, but the idea that investors whom are non-accredited investors can invest in private companies is relatively a new space.
So what advice do you have for someone who might choose that route as well?
We've done 3 sort of unique campaigns related to equity crowdfunding. One which was a test the waters campaign, where you effectively ask a community, hey, if you could invest, would you? The second one was a traditional Title III endeavor on a company called Start Engine here in Los Angeles. And tomorrow we launch a new equity crowdfunding campaign on a platform called WeFunder. But amongst all those efforts, it's important to identify that the company has an audience. We're lucky. We have 300,000 photographers, and that means that we
Yeah.
have a large mailing list, and we have a large social reach at the same time. So those companies whom are considering equity crowdfunding have to have a unique advantage, and that is an audience. And that can be done through social or an email list, but it's important that companies recognize that it takes marketing muscle to get the attention of users to give them the opportunity to invest in your company.
How have you leveraged social media either for funding or just for marketing in general?
We're a highly social sort of platform as it stands,
Mm-hmm.
and our users who participate as suppliers or photographers on our platform are relatively social as well. So it's easy for us to reach those individuals on Instagram and on Facebook. I think our Facebook audience is about 11,000 followers, and our Instagram, which is our bread and butter, I think is 20,000 followers. Um, you know, the ability to speak to your user persona in the language that they effectively want to be spoken to is really critical. We have a much larger email list, and of course, email continues to be the highest converting channel for us in marketing. But it's important to have a rounded approach, depending on what kind of platform you are.
What was the moment that you needed a little bit of extra tenacity, maybe an obstacle while you were growing or something else that you had to really, really be persistent with?
Financing.
Mm-hmm.
Our $2 million that we raised did not happen in one check. It came through almost 7 different tranches, as they call them, 7 different financing efforts through notes. One of the key things I think that an entrepreneur needs to recognize is to find their champion in the finance world. I was very lucky to meet, he's probably my biggest mentor and our most valued advisor to date is Alan Morgan. And he's the managing director at Idea Labs, but at the same time, he's also an angel investor. And so privately, he invested into me, effectively, in my vision. And from that relationship alone, we were introduced to his network of other angel investors. And it's that network effect that's really critical for an entrepreneur to recognize and understand. And often, when you haven't graduated from Yale or Harvard and you haven't worked up in Silicon Valley at Google or Twitter, you're at a disadvantage by definition to raise capital. And so you really need to find somebody that can be your most trusted advisor and financial advocate and feel comfortable introducing you to his network or her network.
Awesome advice. Thank you
Yeah.
so much to my guest, Chad Newell, co-founder and CEO of Snapwire. We're here to inspire, inform, and connect a community of entrepreneurs. I'm Alex Worley, and this is Business Rockstars.